I think chaos can breed clarity. Bear with me. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from ESPN Central Texas. Thank you for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. Today is a slightly shortened episode of the podcast for two key reasons. One being the egregious sunburn that I got this weekend. Two being the Savannah Bananas schedule. Let's jump into Saturday, where honestly, there wasn't a wild amount of upsets. It's not like this weekend was just complete and utter chaos, but there's one thing that I think is clear now in the Big 12, and that is that teams that are getting blown out or upset might be in trouble in March. This is what I look for. And today's not going to be an overreaction. It might honestly be an underreaction for some teams, like a Texas Tech. You're probably thinking, oh, they just lost to UCF. They got to be by 10 points in the second half individually, right? They had a chance at halftime and then fell apart at the very end of the game. There's no way Texas Tech can somehow be okay after a loss like that. Well, I disagree. Kansas also lost to UCF, and BYU lost to Oklahoma State. And I think that some of the good teams in the Big 12 are going to lose these type of games, whether they're in the first week or in the third to last week or second to last week. Everybody trips up in a conference that's this tough. And when you get to the very end of a conference schedule, that is so daunting. Where I look at a reaction that is right, like keen down the middle, teams that are being upset right now, teams that are being blown out right now, you probably aren't in a very good spot going into March. It's crunch time. If you got blown out 4 weeks ago on the road at Allen Fieldhouse, I don't care. I don't think that's an issue. When you were a no-show at Allen Fieldhouse, a la Texas, that's when I think this can be an issue. When you are a no-show in Fort Worth, like Cincinnati, namely in the second half, where it was like, all right, Cincinnati at halftime wasn't exactly out of this game. There was still a possibility they could make it competitive. Now they just keep dropping contests. You are out of the March Madness picture by going 1-4 in your last five. Cincinnati goes from comfortably in. I mean, the net liked them. They've been around the middle of the pack in the Big 12, which probably gets you into March. And then they just fell off the face of the earth over the course of the last 2 weeks. And that's not good. You got blown out in Fort Worth. That doesn't bode well for your standing going into March. This could have been a conversation, and honestly should have been a conversation about Oklahoma and how Oklahoma could be fraudulent by getting upset this late in the game. However, the Oklahoma State Cowboys crap the bed and lose by 2 in overtime. As you look around the league at West Virginia, Iowa State, there's a team in Iowa State who's taking care of business, but they didn't quite take care of business in the way you'd expect. 71-64 was much tighter than this game should have been, and they started lackadaisical and never really seemed to catch their footing, but a win is, of course, a win. And then the crown jewel of the weekend, Houston and Baylor going to overtime, where Houston outscores Baylor by 16 points in the first half, gets outscored themselves by 16 points in the second half, and then Jamal Shed, 13-7, leads his Cougars. That was a score in overtime, 82-76, the final, as Houston goes into Waco and gets a win. When you're losing home games, when you're getting upset and when you're getting blown out, I start to pump the brakes on how good you're going to be in March when you're doing that on February 24th. We are at a juncture in the game where the Big 12 teams that can compete in March Madness should be playing their best basketball. And maybe this comes from a point of, and I'll say this, there are reasons I'm worried about Houston, and there's some of the same reasons I'm worried about Iowa State and Kansas and even a BYU, specifically a BYU in Houston in this scenario. And I'll get to those in a second, but I want to point out Baylor, and kind of the reason that I sparked this conversation is there are so many people on social media talking about this Baylor team, and you hear it about most Big 12 teams or most teams in America, is that this team's young. You know, the core is young. There are 2 or 3 guys who are so young. There are some freshmen who are contributors, so they got a couple more weeks to acclimate. My brother in Christ, if you're not acclimated by now, if you're not ready for the competition, if you haven't settled in, if there isn't this team's playing cohesively, you're out of time. we don't have tune-up games really left on the docket here. We have games that determine whether or not you're a 2 seed or a 5 seed, and those are very big differences. For a Baylor, if they go on just a horrendous run late, they give me their 8-6 in Big 12 play. If they go on a horrendous run, a BYU a horrendous run, a Texas Tech a horrendous run, then you look around and you go, this team went from a possible 4 seed or a 3 seed to a 7 seed, and that is not good. It puts you in a tougher spot in round 1 and certainly a much tougher spot in round 2 when you're facing a 2 seed. If you're an 8 seed in March Madness or a 9 seed, then you're really looking at a tough go with things, and that is the difference in what you get on March 24th, on February 24th as you go into March. Then the worry I have, and again, I don't think I'm overreacting here. Maybe I'm underreacting to some of these teams. Or should I be more worried about Texas Tech? Should I be really worried about Baylor? Should I still be kind of worried about Kansas? I want to pump the brakes, but I will temper your expectations here. If you're a Houston fan, if you're a BYU fan, get ready for the age-old question. The one thing that us Big 12 folks have been asking ourselves for a decade now, and everybody, if you're a Texas Tech fan, you've heard this. If you're a Cincinnati fan, you haven't. If you're a TCU fan, you've heard this. If you're a UCF fan, you have not. If you're an Iowa State fan, we've been here. A West Virginia fan, we've been here. Does the Big 12 gauntlet hurt teams going into March? Now, we've seen Big 12 basketball teams win championships recently, and it was a much more prevalent issue. And we still talk about, like, at Iowa State last year, did they peter out? Were they hot at the wrong time? And how much does a Big 12 schedule wear on you? I wasn't of the belief, as of the last couple of years, after I watched with my own 2 eyes in Indianapolis, Baylor win a national championship, that a tough Big 12 gauntlet is going to kill you going to March. I think you should lose out in the first round or 2 of the Big 12 tournament, get it out of the way, go home, and get ready for the tournament. However, I don't think that the Big 12, being the biggest and baddest conference in college basketball, is going to set teams back from winning a national title. It can only help, right? Unless you're Houston or BYU. Now, Houston just showed they could go on the road and beat Baylor, but this is a knockdown drag out. It took everything. It took everything Jamal Shedd and LJ Cryer and company had to win this game in Waco. They got Cincinnati at home. That's fairly easy. But then they end the season with Oklahoma on the road, who for the better part of the year was in the top 25. UCF on the road, who seems to be stunning people, Kansas included a couple of months ago. And then, speaking of the Jayhawks, they go to Lawrence. So they actually host the Jayhawks. They come down from Lawrence on March 9th. That's not an easy 3 games to end the schedule. So your knockdown drag out against Baylor continues with more knockdown drag out games. If you're BYU, you just took one off the chin against Kansas State, a 10-point loss, could have been closer. Now you go to Kansas, TCU at home, Iowa State on the road. Those aren't fun. And then Oklahoma State at home is kind of your breather as you go into the Big 12 tournament. But we're talking games that drain teams, games that go to the wire, and a Kansas State game that you lost by double digits, but it didn't feel like you had to lose by double digits. You're in that fight to the very end, and you just go, that sucks. And I wonder how many of those, how many of the games that end in, that sucks, catch up to the new teams in March Madness. Now, I have no analytic. I have no data to back that up. But I've seen teams get chewed up, spit out. First-year head coaches chewed up, spit out by what the Big 12 is. Now, I've seen first-year head coaches like Jerome Tang soar, go to the Elite Eight. Last year, one of the most parity-filled March Madness tournaments in history. And Kansas State took advantage. Can BYU and Houston do that? They're 2 of the better teams in this conference. And Houston's the best team in this conference. My worry is, at what point, an elite level of defense, sure. At what point, or is there a point where things slow down because where the season gets you? Seen it before. Will we see it again this year? I hope not. But keep it in mind here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. LinkedIn Talent Solutions is where I go to make sure that I can find the right hire every single time. Look, I love to hire interns. I think it's great that a college student can get experience in social media. And now that I'm working with the Savannah Bananas and chasing these banana balls every weekend and all these big games, I need some assistance. So what do? I make hiring easy with LinkedIn Talent Solutions, where 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that you are wearing so many hats and they want to help. They can help you with job descriptions, making the process so quick. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Hey, keep in mind that terms and conditions do apply. Wow, there it is. Just a quick recap from the Big 12 on Saturday, what basketball looked like. I will say it again, Houston getting a win. Kansas drubbing Texas. I don't trust the Longhorns. UCF upsetting Texas Tech, kind of upsetting. It was like a 1.5 point favorite. Kansas State getting it done at home, TCU, and then Oklahoma doing it on the road. Big 12 basketball standings right now, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, man in the rear with UCF and Cincinnati. Not shocking, though Cincinnati has been much improved. Then 10 teams that are kind of in that fight for the middle ground. Kansas State and Texas both at 6-8, Texas at 17-10 overall. I mean, they could find their way out of the NCAA tournament here at the very end. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're still safely in, but I say safely, they're still in, but they could find their way out. BYU and Oklahoma felt good. And then a bunch of teams above 500, Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, Kansas, Iowa State, Houston. We'll talk about that all week long right here on Locked On Big 12. I'm off for a couple of days from the Savannah Bananas, so I can give you a little bit more time to do a little more analysis for these squads. Let's do it right here on Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.